In the tumultuous and unpredictable era of the 3rd century Roman Empire, when thrones tottered and borders blazed under enemy assault, an emperor rose whose name and deeds still provoke debate and admiration. Gallienus, who reigned longer than any other monarch in that century, achieved a truly remarkable feat by holding the reins of power amidst unimaginable chaos. Many historians are inclined to consider him one of the greatest rulers the Roman Empire ever knew, despite all adversities. His reign was an endless succession of exhausting campaigns. He was forced tirelessly to move legions from one hotspot to another, sometimes crushing audacious usurpers who dared to challenge his authority, sometimes repelling the onslaught of fierce barbarian hordes relentlessly pressing towards the heart of the empire. And each time it seemed the empire was on the verge of collapse, he repeatedly and against all odds successfully defended it. But what was the cost of this unceasing vigilance? However, in this endless race for salvation, in this continuous firefighting across the vast territory of the Roman state, Gallienus seemingly had neither the time nor the opportunity to devise a comprehensive, strategic plan to extract the empire from the profound crisis in which it was mired. His genius manifested in tactical decisions, in immediate reactions to suddenly emerging threats. Nevertheless, many of his specialized, situational measures, born of necessity in battle, proved surprisingly effective and farsighted. A special place among them was his revolutionary cavalry corps, which, thanks to its unprecedented mobility and striking power, became a formidable weapon in the emperor's hands. Yet, even such impressive achievements could not fully protect his reputation from an inevitable shadow. It was marred by the regrettable fact that, despite all his efforts, he could not prevent the tragic secession of several vital provinces from the empire, a devastating blow to Rome. When studying the reign of Gallienus, as well as analyzing the era of most 3rd century emperors, one must always remember a fundamental problem historians face. Our ancient sources of information, reaching us across millennia, are often incomplete, fragmentary, and, no less importantly, not always reliable. It is like trying to piece together a complete picture from scattered, partially lost, and in places distorted fragments. Thus, any attempt to reconstruct his reign, any account of his life and deeds, will inevitably contain elements of speculation to some degree. How then, through the mists of time, can we discern the true face of this emperor and truly assess his legacy? Gallienus was born around 218 CE into a Roman aristocratic family whose ancient roots traced back to picturesque Etruria. His path to imperial grandeur was closely tied to his father's fate, who ascended the throne after a brief but fierce civil conflict that erupted between the reigning Emperor Tragedius Gallus and the rebellious usurper Aemilian. At a critical moment, Gallus called upon Valerian, a military commander then leading legions on the Upper Rhine, to bring much-needed reinforcements. However, fate intervened. Before Valerian could arrive with his forces, Gallus fell at the hands of his own soldiers. After this tragic event, Valerian's troops, recognizing him as their leader, immediately proclaimed him emperor and marched to confront Aemilian. Ironically, Aemilian himself was also killed by his own troops, which immediately cleared the path and made Valerian the undisputed ruler of Great Rome. One of Valerian's first and most significant acts as the newly appointed emperor was to elevate Gallienus, his son, to the rank of imperial co-ruler on October 22, 253. By the time he ascended to this high office, Gallienus was already married to Cornelia Salonina, and their union was blessed with the birth of 3 sons, Valerian the Younger, Saloninus, and Marinianus. This unique father-son duo, Valerian and Gallienus, strategically divided the vast responsibilities of the empire along geographical lines. Gallienus was entrusted with the defense and administration of the crucial Rhine and Danube frontiers, while Valerian focused his attention on controlling the eastern provinces and waging a grueling, protracted war against the powerful Sasanian Persia. During these turbulent times, Shapur, the mighty Persian king, had for years been invading the Roman East with impunity, posing a serious threat to the empire. In 254, these two rulers assumed the duties of co-consuls. It remains unknown whether they were in Rome at the time or had already left the imperial capital. It is possible that Gallienus accompanied the troops his father had recalled from the Upper Rhine region back to that important frontier. At the same time, Valerian may have been accompanied by the troops that Aemilian had previously recalled from the Danube the year before during his campaign against Rome. In any case, historical evidence confirms that Gallienus eventually found himself on the Danube, a territory that had repeatedly suffered numerous invasions and usurpations in recent years, and whose legions seem to have been restless since the reign of Maximinus Thrax. In fact, the last three emperors had been elevated to the throne by the Danubian legions, and influential military commanders initially harbored animosity towards Gallienus, whom they considered a refined intellectual unsuited for military affairs. However, Gallienus soon managed to win their favor after a series of triumphs over the Germans and Carpi. Unfortunately, our sources do not provide extensive details about these victories, but it appears Gallienus firmly established himself in the Balkans. It is presumed that he recognized vulnerabilities in the imperial borders. They constituted only a single defensive line, consisting primarily of largely immobile heavy infantry. Consequently, if or when this line was breached, the provinces remained defenseless against devastation. In response, Gallienus began forming a new cavalry corps, capable of rapid response and intercepting any breakthroughs on the frontiers. He recruited cavalrymen from the Balkans, including both heavy lancers and mounted archers. This new force became his personal guard, and as a mounted army, it allowed him to maneuver quickly and effectively respond to crises as they arose. The strategic placement of the newly formed cavalry units was carefully considered. They were positioned in close proximity to the empire's borders, but not directly on them. Thus, in the restless Balkans, these forces were stationed in Sicca, while along the mighty Rhine, their base was established in Augusta Treverorum. This deliberate arrangement ensured that, in the event of an enemy breach of frontier fortifications, these mobile cavalry formations could swiftly counter the invading forces, thereby precluding the need to withdraw significant contingents of troops already engaged in defending the border itself. Such a tactical disposition represented a sophisticated form of defense in depth, meticulously designed to strengthen the outer protective layer of the vast network of fortifications encircling the immense Roman Empire. The year 255 began for Gallienus with his assumption of the honorable office of Consul of Rome, which he shared with his father, who was presumably absent from the capital and still engaged in military campaigns in the eastern provinces. Soon after, Gallienus himself returned to the volatile frontiers, choosing Viminatium as his main operational base. From this position, he successfully crushed an invading army of Sarmatians and possibly Quadi. By the end of 255, the emperor swiftly turned his attention to defending the Rhine frontier against the relentless pressure of the Franks and Alemanni. In his absence from the Balkans, he entrusted command to a certain Crinius. Gallienus diligently sought to prevent the enemy from crossing the mighty Rhine River. Although the enemy eventually managed to cross, Gallienus bravely engaged them in a decisive confrontation and emerged victorious. It became undeniably clear that Gallienus commanded significantly smaller forces while simultaneously confronting two powerful barbarian confederations. The severity of this threat may have been so great that it was believed to require the personal presence of both emperors, and indeed, historical inscriptions confirm the presence of his father Valerian in Colonia Agrippinensis as early as August 256. Subsequently, Valerian moved to the Balkans upon learning of Crinius's illness, taking on the crucial task of reorganizing border defenses. Before himself departing for the Rhine frontier, Valerian also appointed Claudius, the future emperor, as Crinius's replacement in the Balkans. The supreme rulers of the Roman Empire convened in Colonia Agrippinensis to consult on the upcoming division of responsibilities within the state and to formulate a strategy to counter the myriad threats emanating from the border regions. According to the decisions made, Gallienus was to take direct control of Italy and the Rhine frontier, while his elder son, Valerian the Younger, was to serve as the nominal imperial head in the Balkans. This strategic decision was intended to serve as a deterrent against ambitious military commanders seeking to usurp power, as the direct presence of an imperial family member in the region was meant to curb their ambitions. The exact age of Valerian the Younger at the time remains unknown, but it is established that he was placed under the guardianship of a man named Ingenuus. Empress Salanina, Gallienus's wife, reportedly expressed deep distrust of Ingenuus's appearance and conduct, and as it soon turned out, her fears were well founded. Ingenuus also succeeded Claudius as dux of the Balkan frontiers, taking command of the troops in this key region. Claudius himself was sent to Gaul to deliver much-needed reinforcements to Gallienus. Many strategically important cities located on the Rhine frontier, such as Augusta Treverorum, Novitium, and Agrippinensis, were significantly reinforced with defensive structures during this period. Evidence indicates the active construction of new, sturdy stone walls, highlighting efforts to strengthen the empire's borders amidst increasing external danger. In early 257, Emperors Gallienus and Valerian were once again in Rome, serving as co-consuls for the year. It was during this period that Valerian issued the infamous edict initiating widespread persecutions of Christians, before he himself departed for the eastern provinces of the empire. Earlier, when Gordian III ascended the imperial throne, he decided to disband the only legion stationed in Africa, Legio III Augusta. This legion had played a key and, in essence, decisive role in the defeat of his grandfather and uncle, Gordian I and II. After the main military force in this region was abolished, the Mauritanians took advantage of the weakened Roman presence, pushing back imperial borders in Africa and settling a number of border territories. However, Gallienus subsequently reinstated this legion, and it was once again stationed in Africa. Throughout the 250s, active combat was observed in this area as Rome persistently sought to reclaim lost territories. Throughout 257 and 258, the military commander Ingenuus seemingly demonstrated outstanding success in defending the Danubian frontier. By 258, he supposedly began to fear that his growing achievements might cause displeasure among the emperors, who could soon remove him from his post. Whether these fears were justified or not ultimately did not matter, as Ingenuus proclaimed himself emperor in the same year, 258. However, the fact that he did not even have time to mint his own coins before Gallienus's swift attack suggests that the emperor was aware of Ingenuus's plans long before they materialized. A tragic fate befell Valerian the Younger, Emperor Gallienus's son. He fell at the hands of Ingenuus when the latter proclaimed himself emperor. Before his departure, Gallienus reportedly sent his other son, Saloninus, to Gaul. There, the young Saloninus was to be under the care and protection of the Praetorian prefects Silvanus and Postumus, who would later lead the breakaway Gallic Empire. Saloninus was also entrusted with command as dux of the Rhine frontier. The specific location where Gallienus's troops clashed with Ingenuus's army remains uncertain, but it is known to have been in close proximity to Sirmium, possibly near the crossroads at Mursa. Ingenuus's forces proved catastrophically unprepared for a decisive confrontation with Gallienus's powerful shock cavalry. As a result of this unequal struggle, the usurper's army collapsed almost instantly after the initial assault. Ingenuus himself met his end after the battle. During this engagement, the future Emperor Claudius, according to sources, displayed outstanding valor. When Gallienus, concerned, inquired among the soldiers about Claudius's health, who apparently sustained a wound during the battle, one soldier replied that Claudius fought with courage comparable to the legendary Achilles. After the fierce battle, Emperor Gallienus was consumed by an unyielding fury. His elder son had fallen at the enemy's hand, and the emperor burned with an insatiable desire for revenge. In a fit of rage, he ordered his commanders to put to death every male in the areas adjacent to the battlefield, from youth to elder, whether soldier or civilian. This ruthless act of retribution was intended as a stark warning to anyone who would henceforth dare to challenge imperial authority. In the winter of 258 to 259, Roman territories again faced a threat. Sarmatian tribes, presumably the Roxolani, took advantage of the severe frost to cross the icebound Danube and invade the empire. At the head of the Roman forces on the Danube was Gallienus, Ingenuus's successor as supreme commander. It was his honor to lead the defense, and he achieved a series of convincing victories over the invaders. A significant portion of his army was inherited from his predecessor, Ingenuus, and now, emboldened by recent triumphs, the soldiers proclaimed Gallienus emperor. The exact dates of this rebellion remain unclear, as does Emperor Gallienus's whereabouts during that period, but it is presumed that events unfolded sometime in 259. There is a theory that after suppressing Ingenuus's revolt, Gallienus might have redeployed to the Rhine region. In any case, Gallienus's reign was short-lived. He was soon treacherously murdered by his own soldiers, who likely feared harsh reprisals from Gallienus, remembering the severe crackdown after Ingenuus's rebellion. Emperor Gallienus once again arrived at the Danubian limes, began reorganizing the defensive lines, and appointed a new military commander, the future Emperor Probus. After a series of two such swift revolts in this strategically important region, Gallienus took a highly unusual, virtually unprecedented step for a Roman emperor. He took a second wife, marrying Pippa, daughter of Attalus, a Marcomannic tribal chief. However, it is worth noting that due to the nature of our surviving historical sources, it is possible she was the daughter of a Iazyges king, as chroniclers often conflated these two ethnic groups. The motives for this extraordinary marriage have long been debated, but it is important to understand that Gallienus was not a traditionalist. Rather, he always sought innovation. This dynastic alliance provided him with a powerful ally in a region that had for decades been plagued by numerous revolts and enemy invasions. The emperor evidently hoped that having such a close ally would make any potential usurpers think twice before challenging his authority. Notably, Gallienus's wife, Salanina, seemingly approved of or at least acquiesced to the presence of a new wife. Among other developments, the Marcomanni appear to have been granted permission to settle within Roman territory, presumably in one of the Pannonian provinces. They were entrusted with the crucial mission of defending the empire's border. While the emperor was in the Balkans, alarming news reached him of a new invasion by the Franks and Alemanni into Gaul. In response, he undertook a rapid march, returning to Gaul in late summer 259, where he immediately began defending Roman lands from the invaders. Meanwhile, in the east, Emperor Valerian's campaign against Shapur ended in complete disaster. During peace negotiations following the crushing defeat of his troops, the emperor himself was treacherously captured by the Persians. This catastrophic event left the entire eastern part of the vast empire vulnerable to Persian aggression. Shapur, seizing this opportune moment, fully exploited Roman weakness. He divided his army into detachments, and in total, the Persians managed to capture 36 cities. However, the Persian commanders displayed excessive greed. Burdened with immense plunder and having dispersed military formations, they proved unable to offer adequate resistance to the regrouped Romans. The Roman forces, realizing the critical situation, swiftly reorganized into 4 independent army groups. The main one was led by Odenathus, the Arab king of Palmyra and also a Roman senator, who demonstrated outstanding military talents in defeating the Persian armies. One of the key sources of information about this turbulent period is the 6th century historian Zosimus, who noted in his works that Odenathus pursued the Persians all the way to Ctesiphon not once but twice. He effectively blockaded the Persian troops in their own city, forcing them to focus on saving their children, wives, and their own lives, while he himself restored order to the ravaged territories as much as possible under the circumstances. From the outset of his rule, Odenathus unequivocally demonstrated that he was a loyal commander to Emperor Gallienus and harbored no imperial ambitions. There is reason to believe that he indeed defeated Ballista, who commanded one of the other reorganized Roman army groups, acting under Gallienus's instructions. In recognition of his services, Gallienus awarded Odenathus the honorable titles of Corrector of the entire East, Dux of the Romans, and Imperator, and solemnly celebrated his triumphs, presenting them as his own achievements. Meanwhile, the Franks breached the defensive lines in the Lower Rhine region as part of a large-scale invasion that penetrated as far as Tarraconian Spain. There is evidence that some of these invaders seized ships and conducted raids on the coasts of North Africa. Furthermore, there is reason to believe that some of them settled there, establishing a base from which they launched raiding expeditions across much of the western Mediterranean for the next decade. While Emperor Gallienus exerted all efforts to defend Gaul, the Alemanni and Iazyges tribes managed to break through the border in the Upper Rhine area and invade Italy. Such numerous invasions did not represent the advance of vast barbarian hordes moving in an organized professional army. Instead, these invasions should be viewed as actions by significant military formations operating relatively independently of each other. Their goal was not necessarily full-scale conquest, rather, they were widespread raids aimed at devastating and plundering rich imperial territories. One such military detachment managed to reach the imperial capital itself, causing unprecedented panic. The alarmed Roman Senate, gripped by anxiety, immediately began arming all available forces, mobilizing citizens, praetorians, and veterans. The forces thus assembled evidently had such a powerful deterrent effect on the numerically superior barbarian detachments that the latter chose to swiftly retreat. Thus, the Eternal City escaped imminent peril, but the Apennine Peninsula nevertheless suffered significant hardship as the Alemanni and Iazyges departed its confines. Many populated areas were mercilessly plundered and utterly devastated, with some even becoming completely depopulated. In early spring of 260, Gallienus himself arrived in Italian lands, leading a relatively modest but highly effective cavalry corps numbering approximately 10,000 horsemen. One chronicler claims that in a battle near Mediolanum, Gallienus managed to destroy 300,000 Alemanni and Iazyges, although such an enormous figure of 300,000 might seem utterly implausible at first glance. However, modern historian Ika Sivan considers this assertion quite plausible, suggesting that Gallienus attacked numerous enemy camps individually, each likely numbering between 20 and 30,000 people. The initial swift and unexpected attack on several such camps could have triggered a panicked flight of the Alemanni to neighboring encampments, especially considering that Roman forces were already advancing in their direction. Sivan further suggests that this could have caused a domino effect, leading to the complete rout of several or even all of these dispersed military contingents, with Gallienus's elite cavalry units easily dealing with the scattered and fleeing Alemanni forces. The Iazyges, it appears, had already retreated, crossing the Alps. There they were met by the governor of Rhaetia, who had proactively assembled significant forces from garrisons located along the Rhine. This Roman commander achieved a decisive victory, leading to the liberation of thousands of Italians. Emperor Gallienus subsequently concluded a peace agreement with both the Iazyges and the Alemanni. According to the terms of this treaty, Rome was obligated to pay tribute to these tribes, and in return, they were to provide soldiers as needed. Such an agreement was considered quite reasonable, as it promised to alleviate the severe manpower shortage from which the empire had suffered in recent decades due to numerous wars and devastating epidemics. However, Gallienus was not destined to long enjoy the fruits of this diplomatic success. Already in the summer of 260, a revolt erupted in Gaul led by Postumus. By then, the Gallic provinces had already suffered severe damage from constant Frankish and Alemanni invasions. Emperor Gallienus, focused on defending Italy, had effectively abandoned these provinces to their fate, which caused deep resentment. At that time, Gallienus's son, Silanus, was still in Colonia Agrippinensis under the protection of Praetorian prefect Silvanus. Silvanus ordered Postumus to hand over the plunder that Postumus's troops had seized from a Frankish military detachment returning home after a successful raid on Gaul. Nevertheless, Postumus's soldiers were extremely indignant at this attempt to assert authority by a representative of a distant emperor who, in their opinion, was clearly neglecting his duty to protect the Gallic provinces. As a result, they proclaimed Postumus emperor. After this, Postumus immediately besieged Colonia Agrippinensis. Soon, Silanus and Silvanus were handed over to Postumus and executed. Such was the extremely dire situation of the vast empire in the summer of 260. Gallienus's own father was a prisoner of the Persians, Italy was completely overrun, and Gaul and Spain suffered brutal devastation from continuous Frankish raids. Added to these woes was the tragic death of Gallienus's second son, killed by a usurper in Gaul. Another serious issue, in Gallienus's firm conviction, was the Senate's demonstration of independence during the defense of Italy. To be fair, the Senate at that time completely disregarded the authority of the Praetorian prefect and the city prefect, two high-ranking officers vested with full military authority in the capital. It was this shattered empire that Gallienus was destined to lead as sole emperor. Numerous usurpers, inevitably arising in such turbulent times, found loyal allies among the members of the Senate. Gallienus undoubtedly vividly recalled how, in the past, the Senate had appointed its own emperors, openly opposing figures like Maximinus Thrax. In response to these challenges, Gallienus took decisive steps, abolishing the positions of legionary legate and tribunus laticlavius. Thus, senators could no longer participate in army service unless their appointment came directly from the emperor. Raising a rebellion against the reigning emperor was always an extremely costly undertaking. The loyalty of military units and key figures had to be secured with enormous sums of bribes and donatives, and senators, as is well known, were among the wealthiest citizens of the empire. Gallienus's goal in eliminating these army positions was undoubtedly to exclude wealthy senators, who possessed sufficient means to organize a revolt, from the ranks of the army. These important positions were now designated for career soldiers, who would have a real chance for advancement, instead of inexperienced and potentially disloyal senators. Additionally, he removed many senators from provincial governorships. In his view, these were people he could no longer trust. All these decisive and unpopular measures undoubtedly contributed to Gallienus becoming one of the most hated rulers of his time. Emperor Gallienus maintained the established practice of strategically appointing a dux, responsible for a longer stretch of the border, to more effectively defend the vast empire. Gallienus himself is described as a figure of exceptional, even relentless, ruthlessness towards those suspected of conspiracy. According to Ammianus Marcellinus, he unhesitatingly applied cruel torture against anyone suspected of treason, whether a real or imagined conspirator. It was likely during this period of his reign that Gallienus ended the persecutions of Christians, which had been initiated by his father. In 261 AD, Gallienus attempted to cross the Alps but suffered a crushing defeat and was forced to retreat. As a result of this military failure, Hispania and Britannia openly declared their support for Postumus. In response, Gallienus sent Postumus a letter, challenging him to single combat to prevent further loss of Roman lives. Postumus, however, replied with disdain, stating that he was not a gladiator and had no intention of becoming one. Gallienus gained widespread renown for his exceptional personal